The United States and Canada have long been top allies, the two nations standing side by side on the world stage, sharing the longest undefended land border, and relying on each other for billions of dollars in trade. The result of this election will have major impacts on Canada. Canada and the U.S. are each other's largest customers. 75% of Canada's exports go to the U.S. Donald Trump has said he will put a 10 to 20% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. That could mean a massive hit to the Canadian economy. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, isn't looking for a major shakeup in American trade policy, meaning things could be largely status quo for Canada. But whoever wins the election will be in charge when the new NAFTA comes up for renegotiation in 2026. Trump has also promised a mass deportation program which could push hundreds of thousands of migrants north to Canada. Remember, even relatively minor changes to immigration rules under the first Trump presidency caused a huge influx of illegal crossings into Canada. Experts say Harris's approach to immigration would likely be more in line with Canada's. The Biden-Harris administration did negotiate a deal with Justin Trudeau's government to allow Canada to turn back migrants at the border. Trump has said he would not protect NATO members that don't meet the 2% defense spending target. Canada spends just 1.37% of GDP on defense. And while the federal government does plan to meet the goal, that's not until 2032. Harris has said if she was president, the U.S. would remain committed to NATO, vowing to stand by the alliance and its causes, including the war in Ukraine. David Cohen is the U.S. ambassador to Canada, and he joins me now. Ambassador, happy Election Day. Thanks for speaking with us today.
Happy Election Day to you as well, David. Thanks for having me on the air, and thanks for checking in on my hometown capital.
You got it, sir. I want to ask you about the statement we've seen from the FBI today about bomb threats in several states, including places like Georgia and Michigan. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation says this appears to trace back to Russia. What's your reaction to news that this sort of interference and these sorts of threats are being made on voting day here in the United States?
Well, I have two reactions. First of all, I'm not surprised. We've identified Russia, we, the United States, have identified Russia as a significant potential threat to election interference and election obstruction. We have given warnings about that publicly, and law enforcement in the United States, as is evidenced by your report, has been very vigilant about this. So my first reaction, as I said, is a lack of surprise. But my second reaction is I think this is part of what will be an ongoing story about the strength and the resilience of democracy in the United States, because the way you push back on interference and the way that you make sure that those types of actions by malign foreign actors like Russia do not have an impact is by being vigilant about them, identifying them, and disclosing them. And that seems to be exactly what the FBI and our law enforcement authorities are doing.
You're seeing a lot of warnings from law enforcement across the country, warning people from, say, militia groups who may want to be on the hunt for voter fraud or, what they can perceive to be irregularities. To avoid it, we're seeing security fences going up here in Washington, D.C. And even in some states, they're talking about the deployment of snipers. It's an unusual thing to see that sort of thing on an election day. I just wonder, what does that tell us about the division that exists right now in the electorate and the polarization that's out there in the U.S. political climate right now, sir?
Well, I'm not sure that Russian interference in elections have anything to do with divisiveness or polarization in politics, but I think it is a sign of the times.
These are more concerned about domestic concerns. I meant, Ambassador. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. We're seeing like the DA in Philadelphia warning people not to do anything silly because they will arrest them and throw them in jail. That it has to come to that on voting day. I'm curious for your thoughts.
Well, again, it doesn't make me happy that we have to worry about those things, but it does make me happy that we're focused on it, that law enforcement at multiple levels are focused on them, and that we're bound and determined at every level of government to protect the integrity of the electoral process, which is the absolute hallmark of a strong and vibrant democracy. And that's what the United States has, a strong and vibrant democracy. and will take all steps necessary to ensure that fair elections can be conducted, because it's the ultimate exercise of the democratic rights of the American people.
I know, because of your diplomatic appointment, I know you had a previous career in partisan politics, but you're not allowed to weigh into the actual politics of Election Day without getting in trouble with U.S. authorities. But when you're watching this tonight, what are you going to be watching for as the U.S. ambassador to Canada? What will be the key thing you're paying attention to in Ottawa?
Well, I think the key thing I'm going to pay attention to that I can talk about is whether we, in fact, have been successful in providing an environment where a free and fair election can take place and the will of the American people can be expressed in an election result that is fairly and expeditiously reported. That doesn't mean we're going to have a result tonight. In many places, we will be unlikely to have a complete result tonight. But I think there's a higher premium on getting the right result reported than to getting a result reported quickly or too quickly. And I do think a big story coming out of the 2024 elections in the United States will be that the United States, once again, for countless times in its 250th year history, has provided for the exercise by its people of their right to vote and to preserve the most enduring and important democracy that exists in the world. And I think that ultimately it will be democracy that is the winner in the elections that take place in the United States today.
It's an acute concern, right? The faith in the results, the faith in the process, given the amount of conspiracy theories that are just ripping through Western democracies right now, with Russia and others aiding and abetting it, to have people trust this process and trust its results, especially with sort of the history of what happened after the last election. It's vital people believe what they're told tonight.
I think it's a concern, but this is not brand new. And by the way, it didn't start in the last election either. My current best reminder to people is the elections that took place in 2020, which is only 24 years ago, relatively recent history in American history. And in that election, we did not have a result in the presidential election for almost 5 weeks.
2000, you mean, right? The Bush-Gore? You said 2020. You're talking 2000, right?
I'm sorry, I meant 2000. So it was only 24 years ago. And the country didn't fall apart. The democracy didn't fall apart. Violence didn't spill out into the streets. The system worked. And at the end of the day, when the system worked and a victor was declared, America came back together. And at the end of the road, the democracy of the United States was stronger than it was going into the disputes. And I think if there are any disputes around the results of this election, the same thing will happen. We'll have to let the American system and democracy in the American system work. And after it works, the country will come together, and we will once again be standing in front of the world's most enduring and significant democracy.
No matter what happens tonight, sir, no matter who wins and when all the results are in and the Electoral College is certified, there will be challenges in the Canada-U.S. relationship going forward, in addition to all the opportunities that the most profitable trading relationship in the history of the world has to offer. Whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's Kamala Harris, do you have any doubt that things like supply management and things such as the digital services tax will be front and center on the agenda when you get to the NAFTA renewal phase of the relationship and whatever other trade discussions there are?
So I struggle a little bit with the terms front and center. I think all the issues you identified are live and active issues today between our two countries. But the hallmark of our relationship, the hallmark of the strength of the relationship, is that we can have differences of opinion in the trade context, differences of opinion about some foreign policy elements, about defense investment, and it doesn't blow up the relationship between the two countries. We discuss them. We talk about them. We resolve our differences, and the U.S.-Canada relationship comes out at the other end of those discussions more powerful and stronger than it was beforehand. So I think every issue you identified, which is a current issue in the United States-Canada discourse, will continue to be an issue in that discourse. But I have every confidence that we will address those differences civilly, responsibly. We will resolve them. And at the end of the day, the United States and Canada will still enjoy this powerful, strong relationship which has existed for over a century between our two countries.
Ambassador David Cohen, thank you for making time to speak with us on what is undoubtedly a busy day. We appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you again for giving me some time on your show.
Now, I'm joined by two former U.S. ambassadors to Canada, Gordon Giffin and David Wilkins. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. Thank you for being here on Election Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador Giffin, I wonder if I can start with you. What do you make of this race compared to what we've seen in previous years in the United States?
No comparison. I've never seen anything like this. David and I have been involved in politics in our respective states for, I hate to think how many decades, and my guess is he hasn't seen anything quite like this either, with an incumbent president who was running, backing out of the race with 3 months left to go, the vice president becoming anointed, starting from ground zero as a candidate, not as an organization. And the ebb and flow of this election has been dramatic, to say the least. I'm personally glad it's about to end. I'm worn out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who share that sentiment, Gordon Giffin. David Wilkins, what do you make of this? I mean, you had the candidate switch on the Democratic side, the convictions on the Republican side. I mean, Donald Trump is campaigning while on bail. I mean, he's got a sentencing hearing in New York in a couple of weeks, and he could be the president-elect when that happens. I mean, what are your thoughts on where this race is, sir?
Well, it's certainly a big day in the United States, and it's going to be probably a long night. You know, it's like Gordon said, it's the closest race, certainly going into the election day, that we've ever seen. I mean, it was a 49-49 tie with the popular vote by poll announced yesterday. And the last two elections, one that Trump won, one that he lost, he was always losing in the popular vote going in. So that's interesting. Another interesting point is that there's only been one other sitting vice president in the last 188 years become president, and that was George H.W. Bush when Reagan had about a 70% approval rating. We'll see if Harris can be the second one. It's going to be very interesting. As we know, it boils down to about 7 states, probably 50,000 votes spread around 2 or 3 states, and we'll see. Gordon's home state of Georgia is going to be critical. Pennsylvania, obviously, in play. If one candidate wins both those, this game probably is over. Well, we got an interesting couple hours ahead of us tonight.
No, it's a good point David, you make about Bush. Oh, go ahead, Gordon Giffin. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I was just going to say, to his point about Georgia, I think Georgia will be important. We'll know. I think we'll have a pretty good sense of how Georgia's going early enough in the evening that it'll give us a sense of direction. David won't be surprised that my instinct is that Georgia's going for Harris, and I think as the rest of the country plays out, it will be very hard for the former president to win without the state of Georgia. I also think another neighboring state of David's may very well go for Harris, and I think that is North Carolina.
You know, that's.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, David. Yeah, go ahead, David Wilkins. Your thoughts on North Carolina, because you're right there in South Carolina. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love. Yeah, I'm right here, right between the two of the swing states, and you know, Gordon and I have great respect for each other. We just don't agree. I actually think Georgia's it's going to be narrow, but I believe from everything I'm hearing and reading, Georgia's going with Trump barely, and North Carolina as well. But every race is close, and you know, 1%, 2% would be a pretty good margin with these 7 states that we're talking about.
David Wilkins, I wonder your thoughts. I mean, you served under the Bush-Cheney government, and this is because of the unprecedented election. I mean, Dick Cheney and Barack Obama are on the same side of this one somehow. I mean, what do you make of the political dynamic here, and what's happening with sort of this reorientation inside the Republican Party?
Well, I'm like Gordon. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, you also got a former Democrat candidate for president who's been out campaigning for Trump. So never seen that before either. So it's just a different scenario, and rough and tumble. You know, American politics is a contact sport. It's been a tough campaign, and a lot of ups and downs for both sides. And I'm with Gordon. I'm sort of glad it's coming to an end.
Well, David, if you're referring to
Gordon,
Tulsi Gabbard, I'm not sure that she qualifies as a former Democratic candidate for president. Nobody even noticed that she ran. That but she is campaigning without a doubt for Donald Trump. There are a number of people who are out there trying to get a job in a Trump administration. She's one of them. Robert Kennedy's one of them. It would be David and I'll have to. David and I will have to have a drink together after this, and we'll not after this call, but after this election, and we'll talk through what we actually thought was going on during this period of time. I just feel strongly that the momentum is in the Harris direction. I do think, David, that it's going to be a more definitive win in Georgia this time. Obviously, President Biden won Georgia by roughly 12,000 votes. We elected 2 Democrats to the United States Senate in 2020, largely because people were rejecting President Trump at the time. And I think fundamentally, like many experts have been saying on TV, and I'm seeing this in the North Atlanta suburbs as we speak, I think women are going to reject Donald Trump for a lot of reasons. For a lot of reasons. People talk about abortion all the time, but I think there are a lot of reasons that he has repelled a sufficient number of women who might lean to voting for a Republican. They'd vote for David Wilkins, but they're not going to vote for Donald Trump.
Well, there's certainly
that's an interesting point you make.
You know, what the latest poll I saw.
How much of a challenge is that for the Republicans? How much of a challenge is that for the Republicans at this stage?
It is a challenge. At the same time, it's a gender gap. More men are voting for Trump. More women are likely to vote for Harris. I think the last time I saw a difference was 18% men favored Trump, 16% women favored Harris. So big gender gap right there. No question about it. That's one thing to look for. So how many? We've got, 80 something, 78,000 votes. Million votes already cast before today started. So you look at the early vote, how many women are voting, how many men are voting. Those are things to be looking at in the next couple hours to see what kind of turnout we got on both sides.
We have very early numbers, just to let you know, from Indiana and Kentucky. Sorry, gentlemen. We have very early numbers from Indiana and Kentucky. No surprise, I'm sure, for either of you, but I do want to give results. 70% of the votes in Indiana for Donald Trump, 80% of the votes in Kentucky also for Donald Trump. So I just wanted to get that in there. Go ahead, Gordon Giffin.
Yeah, I was just going to add that your previous panel and many have been talking for weeks now that somehow Harris was going to have dramatic erosion in the African-American vote on Election Day or in the early vote. I think when all of the votes are tabulated, you're going to find that she does extraordinarily well in the African-American community. She's doing very well in Georgia right now, where roughly 30% of the electorate is African-American. I think you'll find that she will be performing in the same dimension as previous candidates, Democratic candidates for president. So the idea that somehow Donald Trump was going to get a meaningful percentage of the African-American vote, I think, was a myth.
David Wilkins, if I can, I wonder what you make of the FBI has announced that They believe Russia is behind a series of bomb threats at polling stations in a number of states. We've also seen district attorneys and police chiefs all across the country sort of raising the security level and warning people against meddling with the vote count. You know, the stop the steal sort of movement that does exist in this country right now. You have any concerns on how this result, one way or another, will be received by the broader American public and trusted by the broader American public?
Well, I think it concerns all of us. I mean, you know, we need democracy to work. I think democracy in the United States will work. I think it will survive. I think it will win out in the end. But we've got a lot of bad actors that want to cause us problems, and we have to take it seriously. So it's not something I'm proud of to see our elections being meddled with, but it's something we need to protect and ensure that it doesn't have any effect on the outcome of the election.
Gordon Giffin, your thoughts on that?
Well, I obviously agree with David. We've had 7 different bomb threats at different voting locations in Georgia. They had to stop voting in the southern portion of DeKalb County outside of Atlanta because of bomb threats. It's turned out that there are no bombs. So the fact that it may be happening as a result of some foreign power intervening looks like that may be the case. I do think that we may be turning a page here, not to take the line from Vice President Harris, but I am very hopeful that the outcome of this election will be sufficiently clear that we will be able to move on as a country, and that while people on the losing side, whichever it is, will be frustrated, and some will have public declarations about their frustration. I think our society is tired of all of this now. We've been going through it for 6-8 years, and I think we're all ready after this election to join hands and say, whoever wins is the new president, and we're going to restore civility and respect for each other. I may be overly optimistic, but that's where I think we're going to come out of all of this. And I believe and trust that the margin tonight in the Electoral College is going to be sufficiently significant on the Harris side that any whining about it will be comical.
Okay, so Gordon Giffin, you are obviously predicting a Kamala Harris victory when all is said and done. Ambassador Wilkins, where are you on this? Will you hazard a guess on how America will ultimately vote?
Yes, I think Donald Trump's going to get reelected. I'll be reelected President of the United States. And I agree, you know, Gordon and I disagree on the outcome, but we agree on what he just said about moving forward. This country's got to unite regardless of who wins and move on. And I'm hopeful that we'll do that regardless of who wins. We just happen to disagree on who's going to be the winner.
You know, our ambassadors panel, you're split down the middle, just like the polls. So it seems like a fitting place to leave the conversation. Gordon Giffin and David Wilkins, both former U.S. ambassadors to Canada. Gentlemen, it's always good to speak with you. Thank you for being with us on Election Day.